It started with a sealed legal briefing no one expected to become public, a forgotten document tied to Prince Philip, a private estate meeting, and a gift allegedly hidden from the royal record for years. But when Zara Tindall reportedly learned what lawyers had uncovered, even seasoned palace insiders were stunned by her reaction, because this was never supposed to surface. And now, questions are exploding across royal circles about who knew and why it stayed buried for so long. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, Prince Philip's personal affairs existed inside a strange and heavily guarded corner of royal life. Even within palace circles, insiders often described him as a man who separated official duty from private loyalty with almost surgical precision. There was the public Philip, the sharp-tongued consort walking beside Queen Elizabeth II through decades of constitutional crisis, state banquets, and royal scrutiny. And then there was the deeply private Philip, the one who reportedly maintained handwritten arrangements, discreet understandings, and deeply personal gifts that ever passed through the rigid machinery of palace administration. According to various interpretations now circulating among royal commentators, one of those arrangements may finally have surfaced through a legal review tied to ongoing inheritance assessments connected to the late Queen's era, and the timing could not have been more explosive. Reports suggest the discovery emerged during confidential estate evaluations involving personal holdings, archived correspondence, and privately assigned possessions connected to Philip's final years. Lawyers allegedly stumbled upon references to a gift linked directly to Zara Tindall, something that, according to insiders, never appeared in broader royal disclosure discussions. Not publicly, not formally, and certainly not in a way that would have attracted institutional scrutiny while the monarchy was navigating the chaos of transition after Queen Elizabeth II's death. The revelation immediately triggered whispers behind palace walls because royal administrators are known for documenting everything, every transfer, every allocation, every significant item tied to senior members of the family, which is why the alleged omission instantly raises uncomfortable questions. Was it a simple oversight buried beneath years of paperwork and emotional upheaval? Or was someone deliberately protecting Philip's final private wishes from becoming part of the official royal record? What made the situation even more emotionally charged, however, was Zara's reported reaction once the details were quietly explained to her. Several insiders claim she did not respond with outrage or entitlement. Instead, those familiar with the meeting describe a deeply emotional silence settling over the room as lawyers laid out the significance of what they had uncovered. Because unlike many royal disputes fueled by status, property, or titles, this appeared intensely personal. Zara and Prince Philip were long believed to share one of the closest bonds in the family. He admired her independence, her resilience, and her refusal to chase the machinery of royal hierarchy. She, in turn, reportedly viewed him not merely as a grandfather, but as one of the most grounding and stabilizing figures in her life. Which is why insiders whisper this hidden gift may have carried emotional meaning far beyond monetary value. And almost immediately, tension reportedly began. A spreading behind closed palace doors. Questions circulated quietly among aides and legal advisors about how such a significant arrangement could remain hidden for so long without attracting attention. Some interpretations suggest palace officials intentionally avoided revisiting sensitive personal matters after Philip's death in order to preserve stability during an already fragile period for the monarchy. Others reportedly fear the silence itself created a much larger problem. Because within royal history, hidden arrangements have a habit of resurfacing at the worst possible moments. From private letters locked inside the royal archives to whispered understandings surrounding estates, jewels, and inheritance structures, the House of Windsor has spent decades battling the perception that some truths are carefully managed until they can no longer remain buried. And now, with inheritance reviews once again exposing old fractures beneath the surface, comparisons to past royal secrecy are becoming impossible to ignore. But the deeper investigators looked into Philip's private affairs, the clearer it became this wasn't just about a forgotten possession, it was about loyalty, silence, and a legacy protected for decades. For years, Prince Philip operated inside a world few royals fully understood, a network of private friendships, personal collections, handwritten letters, and deeply guarded traditions that existed far from Buckingham Palace cameras. Reports suggest he separated parts of his personal life from official royal structures with almost military precision. And according to insiders, one particular arrangement may have remained hidden until now, because Philip never intended for the wider institution to interfere with it. That quiet separation between the public monarchy and Philip's intensely private world is now becoming the center of mounting speculation across royal circles. Because those who spent decades around the late Duke of Edinburgh often described him as a man who trusted very few people completely. He respected discipline, he admired loyalty, and above all else, he reportedly despised unnecessary interference from palace bureaucracy. Various royal historians have long argued that Philip preferred direct understandings over complicated institutional procedures, especially when personal relationships were involved. While Queen Elizabeth II reprised essential continuity and constitutional restraint, Philip was frequently viewed as the force operating just outside the polished machinery of the crown, sharp, unpredictable, and fiercely protective of the people he considered truly his own. According to insiders, that mindset may explain why certain personal possessions and gifts allegedly never entered wider royal documentation systems at all. Reports now suggest there were long-standing private arrangements connected to trusted members of the family. Agreements handled quietly and intentionally outside formal palace channels. In most cases, those alleged arrangements reportedly remained harmless personal matters buried beneath decades of royal routine. But after Prince Philip's death, legal reviews tied to inheritance structures and estate archives allegedly exposed inconsistencies that immediately drew concern from advisors overseeing royal inventories. It was not necessarily the value of the items that raised alarm. It was the absence of official records where records should have existed. And within an institution built upon documentation, protocol, and historical preservation, even small omissions can quickly become explosive. Deeper lawyers reportedly examined archival material, correspondence, and internal estate notes. The clearer it became that Philip may have operated with far more independence than many outsiders realized. Some interpretations even suggest he intentionally bypassed certain administrative systems because he viewed them as slow, overly political, or incapable of respecting deeply personal wishes. Those familiar with palace dynamics claim this behavior was not entirely unusual for him. Philip was known for making decisions quietly and expecting them to be respected without endless consultation. It is now whispered among royal commentators that several trusted aides may have been aware of these informal understandings for years, but chose not to challenge them directly while Philip was alive. After all, few people inside the institution were willing to confront a man whose authority inside palace walls remained formidable even into his later years. But amid all the speculation, one name continues rising to the surface again and again: Zara Tindall. Reports suggest her relationship with Prince Philip existed on a completely different emotional level from many of the monarchy's more formal family dynamics. Unlike senior working royals trapped inside layers of expectation and ceremonial obligation, Zara represented something Philip deeply valued: authenticity. She lived outside the suffocating structure of royal titles while still remaining fiercely loyal to the family itself. Insiders often describe their bond as unusually natural, grounded in shared humor, mutual respect, and a love of equestrian life that gave them common ground away from constitutional pressures. Which is why whispers surrounding undocumented keepsakes allegedly connected to Zara are now generating such emotional weight behind closed doors. Because if Philip intentionally entrusted personal items or arrangements to her outside official systems, it may reveal just how deeply personal those decisions truly were. At the same time, the discovery has sparked increasingly uncomfortable questions about who protected those wishes after Philip's death. Some believe loyal aides simply honored what they saw as private family matters during a period already overwhelmed by grief, transition, and institutional instability. Others fear silence created a dangerous vacuum now filled with speculation, suspicion, and competing interpretations. And as inheritance reviews continue exposing fragments of Philip's hidden personal world, palace insiders reportedly worry this may only be the beginning of a much larger reckoning involving secrecy, trust, and the monarchy's unwritten rules. And as whispers spread through royal households, attention suddenly turned toward the one person many believe Philip trusted more personally than almost anyone else inside the family. Those close to the royal circle claim Zara Tindall didn't react with anger when the discovery was explained to her. She reacted with heartbreak. Because according to various interpretations of the legal briefing, the undisclosed gift may have carried enormous emotional meaning tied directly to Prince Philip's final years. And what truly shook observers was the possibility that Zara herself may never have realized the full story behind it until lawyers laid out the details in black and white. By that stage, the atmosphere surrounding the revelation had already become deeply uncomfortable inside royal circles. What initially appeared to be a quiet administrative inconsistency was suddenly transforming into something much more emotional, much more personal, and far more dangerous for a family already burdened by grief, division, and years of carefully guarded silence. According to insiders familiar with the private discussions, Zara reportedly sat through the legal explanation in near silence as the details unfolded piece by piece. There were no dramatic outbursts, no demands, no public fury. Instead, those familiar with the conversation described something far heavier settling over the room, the realization that Prince Philip may have spent his final years trying to preserve a deeply personal gesture without exposing it to the machinery of palace politics. And for Zara, that realization reportedly carried enormous emotional weight. For decades, observers often described the bond between Zara and Prince Philip as one of the most genuine relationships inside the wider royal family. Unlike many senior royals raised beneath layers of constitutional expectation, Zara represented a kind of freedom Philip admired. She was fiercely independent, direct, grounded, and largely untouched by the endless hierarchy that shaped palace life. Reports suggest Philip trusted her in ways he rarely trusted others, particularly during his later years when illness, age, and institutional pressures increasingly narrowed his world. Which is why insiders now believe the undisclosed gift may have symbolized something far deeper than inheritance or material value. According to various interpretations circulating among royal commentators, it represented trust, loyalty, continuity, a final acknowledgement of a relationship that existed outside ceremony and beyond titles. That emotional significance reportedly became even more overwhelming once discussions turned toward the possibility that Zara herself may never have fully understood what Philip intended. Some insiders claim she believed certain keepsakes or arrangements were simply personal gestures from a grandfather she loved deeply, not hidden matters quietly shielded from formal royal records. But when lawyers allegedly connected archived correspondence, they were able to access confidential documents, estate references, and undocumented notes during the review process. The picture reportedly changed dramatically. Suddenly, what appeared simple became layered with secrecy and silence stretching back years. And according to sources close to the wider family, that realization reopened grief many believed had never truly healed after Philip's death. Because behind the legal terminology and institutional caution sat something painfully human, a granddaughter confronting a possibility that one of the last meaningful acts from her grandfather had remained hidden in silence long after he was gone. As speculation intensified, attention quietly shifted toward the role palace administrators may have played in keeping the arrangement from wider discussion. Some insiders insist there was never malicious intent, arguing that officials simply respected Philip's private wishes during an extraordinarily delicate period for the monarchy. Others, however, reportedly question whether certain aides intentionally avoided reopening sensitive matters that could trigger controversy during the transition from Queen Elizabeth II's reign to King Charles's increasingly fragile era. And inside royal circles, silence often creates its own storm. The longer unanswered questions remain buried, the more damaging they become once exposed. Which is why whispers about hidden arrangements, protected documents, and carefully managed disclosures are now spreading far beyond estate lawyers and palace offices. Throughout the Chanel fallout, reports suggest Mike Tindall remained a stabilizing presence beside Zara, particularly as media attention and internal speculation continued building around the discovery. Those familiar with the situation claim the strain was never truly about wealth or status. In fact, several royal commentators have described the entire matter as deeply personal rather than financial, emphasizing that the emotional impact stems from what the gift allegedly represented rather than what it may have been worth. Because at the center of the controversy sits a painful possibility that Prince Philip spent years quietly trying to preserve a final private expression of trust, only for that intention to become entangled in secrecy after his death. And now, as more questions emerge behind palace walls, the emotional damage appears to be spreading far beyond the original discovery itself. But as emotions intensified behind palace walls, another explosive question began quietly circulating among royal insiders who exactly kept this hidden all these years. Inside royal administration, silence can be more revealing than scandal itself. And according to reports now circulating among Palace observers, several officials allegedly knew fragments of the story surrounding Philip's undisclosed gift long before lawyers reopened the files. Yet somehow, the matter never entered wider estate disclosures. Not publicly, not formally, and certainly not in a way that could attract media scrutiny during the monarchy's most fragile years. That growing realization has now become one of the most explosive elements of the entire controversy. Because within the royal institution, omissions rarely happen by accident. Every possession connected to senior members of the monarchy is typically documented through layers of private secretaries, estate advisors, archivists, and legal administrators whose responsibility is preserving continuity inside an institution built on historical record. Which is why insiders reportedly became deeply unsettled once estate reviews began exposing unusual gaps tied to Prince Philip's personal affairs. According to various interpretations of internal discussions, lawyers examining archival materials allegedly discovered references that did not fully align with official disclosure trails. Certain notes reportedly pointed toward personal arrangements that existed outside broader estate categorization systems, while other documents appeared unusually vague regarding transfers connected to Philip's later years. And almost immediately, whispers began spreading through palace corridors that someone, somewhere, may have intentionally chosen not to press further questions while Philip was still alive. The deeper investigators reportedly looked, the stranger the silence appeared. Sources familiar with royal administration claim some palace aides had long been aware that Philip occasionally handled personal matters outside formal structures. It was apparently viewed less as rebellion and more as an accepted reality of his position within the family. Philip had spent decades cultivating an image of independence, and few officials were eager to challenge his private wishes directly. But according to commentators now revisiting the issue, that same deference may have created a dangerous blind spot once his health began declining. During the emotional chaos surrounding his final years, followed almost immediately by the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the instability that followed, insiders suggest many administrators prioritized institutional calm over reopening sensitive personal matters. In other words, silence became easier than confrontation. And for a while, that silence worked. Royal commentators now speculate that timing played a critical role in why the issue remained buried for so long. Philip's passing marked the end of one era, just as the monarchy was entering one of the most vulnerable transitions in modern royal history. King Charles was stepping into the throne beneath immense pressure. Family divisions were already dominating global headlines. Public confidence in the institution felt increasingly fragile. Under those circumstances, insiders claim few palace officials had any appetite for additional complications involving undocumented gifts, private arrangements, or hidden estate questions tied to one of the monarchy's most formidable figures. Some believe administrators simply convinced themselves the matter was too personal, too emotionally delicate, or too insignificant to justify institutional disruption. Others, however, fear that decision ultimately created a far larger crisis once legal reviews reopened old files that should have been clarified years earlier. At the center of the controversy now sits an increasingly uncomfortable question about how royal gifts are categorized in the first place. Because according to experts familiar with aristocratic inheritance traditions, the line between personal keepsakes and institutionally relevant possessions can become dangerously blurred inside royal households. Was Philip's alleged gift merely a private family matter protected out of respect? Or did its significance require formal disclosure from the beginning? Different interpretations continue colliding behind palace walls, fueling tension between those who defend Philip's privacy and those who believe the monarchy's obsession with secrecy has once again intensified public suspicion unnecessarily. Comparisons are already being drawn to previous royal inheritance disputes that remained hidden for years before quietly surfacing through leaked correspondence. Legal reviews or family disagreements. And within aristocratic circles, those memories still carry enormous weight. What makes the situation even more volatile is the growing belief among insiders that protecting Philip's final wishes may have been the genuine motivation behind the silence. Several commentators insist there was never a coordinated cover-up, merely a collective reluctance to interfere with what loyal aides viewed as deeply personal intentions left behind by a dying patriarch. But others reportedly argue that once institutions begin selectively withholding information, even for emotional reasons, they risk creating the exact scandal they hope to avoid. And now, as speculation spreads beyond palace administration into wider royal circles, the consequences of that silence appear to be escalating rapidly. However, the controversy was no longer confined to paperwork and palace archives, because once word began leaking outside royal circles, the emotional fallout reportedly spread fast through the family itself. As whispers about Philip's hidden gift reportedly spread through aristocratic circles, reactions inside the monarchy became impossible to ignore. Some insiders described deep sympathy towards Zara, while others allegedly feared the revelation could trigger broader scrutiny into private royal arrangements stretching back decades. And with King Charles already carrying the weight of illness and institutional pressure, the timing could hardly have been more devastating for the House of Windsor. Stage. What began as a quiet legal discovery had evolved into something far more volatile, a deeply emotional fracture, cutting through the monarchy at a moment when stability already felt dangerously fragile. According to reports circulating among palace observers, senior royals were privately shaken not only by the discovery itself, but by Zara's emotional response once the hidden details emerged. Those familiar with internal conversations claimed there was widespread sympathy toward her behind closed doors, particularly among family members who understood the extraordinary closeness she shared with Prince Philip throughout his life. Some insiders even describe a growing sense of guilt quietly spreading through certain royal households, as though people were beginning to realize that the silence surrounding Philip's private wishes may have unintentionally deepened the emotional fallout now unfolding around Zara. At the center of the tension reportedly stood King Charles himself, already navigating enormous personal and institutional strain. Sources close to royal circles claim Charles viewed the situation as profoundly delicate on two fronts at once. Emotionally, he allegedly understood exactly why Zara was devastated. Philip had always valued loyalty above performance, authenticity above ceremony. And Charles reportedly knew better than anyone how deeply his father's private gestures could carry emotional meaning beneath their reserved exterior. But publicly, the situation posed an entirely different danger. Because once discussions about hidden gifts and undisclosed arrangements enter public conversation, discussions about hidden gifts and undisclosed arrangements become public knowledge. They inevitably invite wider scrutiny into how the royal family manages inheritance, personal assets, and private understandings hidden beneath the polished image of constitutional order. And according to insiders, that possibility deeply unsettled senior palace figures already exhausted by years of crisis management. As pressure intensified, attention reportedly turned toward Princess Anne, whose response insiders describe as calm but quietly resolute. Various interpretations of internal discussions suggest Anne strongly supported respecting Philip's final wishes, regardless of the growing controversy surrounding the disclosure itself. Those familiar with the dynamic between Anne and Philip often describe a relationship built on discipline, mutual aspect, and emotional understanding rarely visible to the outside world. Which is why some insiders believe Anne viewed the entire situation less as an administrative problem and more as a matter of protecting the dignity of a man who spent decades serving the institution while carefully guarding parts of himself from it. Reports even suggest Anne became increasingly frustrated by the widening speculation, fearing that deeply personal matters tied to grief and family trust were being transformed into institutional scandal simply because legal reviews had reopened old wounds. Meanwhile, palace staff allegedly moved quickly behind the scenes to contain growing leaks surrounding the legal review. Sources claim aides became increasingly concerned that renewed media focus on undisclosed royal arrangements could trigger a cascade of uncomfortable questions stretching far beyond Philip himself. Because if one hidden matter could remain buried for years, what else might still exist quietly beneath the surface of royal administration? That question reportedly became the source of enormous anxiety inside aristocratic circles, particularly among those aware of how many informal understandings and private agreements have historically existed within royal households. Commentators have since described the entire controversy as a collision of grief and protocol, where emotional loyalty collided headfirst with the monarchy's rigid need for institutional order and transparency. And in that collision, almost everyone involved appeared trapped between conflicting obligations to the crown, to family, and to the private wishes of a man no longer alive to explain himself. But even as officials attempted to contain the fallout, the emotional atmosphere reportedly continued worsening behind closed doors. Because the deeper people looked into the meaning of Philip's hidden gesture, the more painful the situation became for Zara personally. Insiders claimed the issue was no longer about secrecy, legality, or inheritance structures. It had become something much harder to process, a realization that Philip may have spent his final years quietly trying to express trust and affection in ways he believed only a few people would truly understand. And according to those closest to the unfolding drama, that realization carried a heartbreaking emotional weight no palace strategy could contain. But the final emotional blow reportedly came when Zara began reflecting not on the value of the gift, but on what it revealed about Philip's quiet view of family loyalty until the very end. In the end, insiders insist this story was never truly about wealth, inheritance, or royal privilege. It was about Prince Philip himself, a man described as stubborn, fiercely loyal, emotionally guarded, and deeply selective about who earned his trust. And now, with lawyers allegedly exposing a private gift hidden from official view, Zara Tindall is said to be confronting a reality few expected: that her grandfather may have left behind one final message, protected in silence until now. For all the public fascination surrounding royal estates, legal documents, and inheritance disputes, those closest to the unfolding situation reportedly believe the deeper emotional truth is far simpler and far more painful. Prince Philip was never known for dramatic displays of affection. He rarely explained himself emotionally, rarely softened his language, and rarely allowed the outside world to fully understand the depth of his personal loyalties. Yet throughout decades of royal duty, insiders consistently described his relationship with Zara as unusually genuine. There were no layers of formality between them, no visible performance, no sense that either one needed to play a role for the cameras or the institution. And according to commentators now reflecting on the controversy, that authenticity may explain why the discovery of the hidden gift struck Zara with such overwhelming force. Because to her, it reportedly felt less like a legal revelation and more like hearing her grandfather speak one final time. Reports suggest the undisclosed arrangement symbolized trust rather than status. That distinction has become increasingly important as speculation continues swirling around the monarchy. Royal historians familiar with Philip's personality argue the revelation fits a long-standing pattern in his private life. He valued discretion almost obsessively. He trusted very few people completely. And when he cared deeply for someone, he often expressed it quietly, indirectly, and without any desire for institutional recognition. Various interpretations now suggest Philip may never have intended for the wider royal structure to analyze, catalog, or debate this final gesture at all. In many ways, Insiders whisper that the secrecy surrounding it reflected the man himself, guarded, controlled, and deeply resistant to allowing palace systems dictate his most personal decisions. But the silence surrounding the matter may also be what transformed a private act into such an emotionally explosive controversy. According to several palace observers, the longer officials avoided clarifying the existence of the gift, the more emotionally loaded the discovery became once lawyers reopened old files and fragmented records. What could perhaps have remained a quiet family understanding instead evolved into a symbol of unanswered questions, institutional secrecy, and buried emotional truths. Zara reportedly found the entire experience emotionally overwhelming not because of what the gift may have been worth, but because of what its concealment appeared to reveal about Philip's final years. Some insiders claim she struggled deeply with the realization that something carrying such personal meaning had remained trapped inside administrative silence long after his death. And for a family already carrying years of unresolved grief, that realization reportedly reopened emotional wounds many believe Eve had begun healing. The controversy has also reignited broader debates surrounding the monarchy's relationship with secrecy itself. Critics argue the royal institution's instinct to shield sensitive matters often creates greater damage once hidden information eventually surfaces. Supporters, meanwhile, insist private family wishes deserve protection, especially during periods of mourning and transition. Yet this story appears to sit painfully between those two positions. Because while palace silence may have originated from loyalty or caution, it also allowed speculation to grow unchecked once fragments of the truth finally emerged. And now, royal commentators increasingly warn that the House of Windsor continues struggling with the same dilemma that has haunted it for generations. How to preserve personal dignity within an institution built upon public scrutiny. In the end, however, the emotional core of the story keeps returning to Philip himself. Not the prince consort standing beside a queen for 7 decades. Not the royal patriarch navigating constitutional duty. But the private man hidden beneath all of it, a grandfather whose final gestures may have revealed more about love, loyalty, affection, and trust than any public ceremony ever could. Because long after crowns, titles, and official tributes fade into history, it is often the deeply personal legacies that endure most powerfully inside families. Quiet acts, unspoken intentions, hidden messages protected in silence until time finally forces them into the light. And as the dust settles around the revelation, one haunting truth appears impossible for the royal family to escape. Sometimes the most powerful royal secrets are not the ones hidden from the public, but the ones hidden from the family itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.